Oh, hey, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people here. Welcome to Included Connect. It's incredible to be watching people join from the waiting room and seeing names and people right across the world. How incredibly remarkable. My name is Chris Halliday. I'm a Salvation Army officer. I'm in Melbourne, Australia, or as this part of Australia has been known for tens of thousands of years. I am currently on the lands of the Woi Wurrung people of the East Kulin Nation. And like the Salvation Army here in Australia, I pay my respects to the elders of the Kulin Nation. It's, as I say, quite remarkable to see that we have people joining us right across the globe today. We have people joining in Brazil, in Argentina, in Iceland, in Europe, the UK, just across the ditch in New Zealand and even Indonesia. We hope that wherever you've come from, or indeed however you're watching, because we are recording tonight for YouTube, so you might be watching this a little bit later on, but wherever you've come from and however you're watching, we hope that you find opportunity to connect with others, to perhaps be equipped and inspired by some of what you hear tonight. At the Included team, we have worked to put together an opportunity for people who are interested in or are actually involved in working towards a more inclusive, affirming, accepting Salvation Army, where all people, especially those who are gender or sexuality diverse, are able to be fully included, fully affirmed, and fully participate. We have an event for you tonight in 3 parts. The first part, which we'll get to really soon, is looking at snapshots of models of inclusion from around the world. Now, some of these you'll hear are from people doing grassroots action. Perhaps they're involved in organising representation at pride parades. It could be that they are running community events or movie nights. Perhaps they're involved in social media outreaches or connection opportunities. Perhaps you'll find through hearing some of these stories, opportunities to connect in with people who are doing activity or action or things on social media in your area or in an area of your interest. We're also going to be hearing from people who are working for change from a policy standpoint. People who are working from a headquarters level to try to institute change through our social programs and our core. It could be that they're involved in advocacy through research or writing or policy creation. Perhaps some of these talks will inspire you to get involved in similar work where you are. Perhaps they'll encourage you to advocate in your territory or in your core for more advocacy for change. Or perhaps you'll have some interest sparked to get writing and start blogging or sharing your very own research. Whatever it is that you hear, we hope that there'll, as I say, be there's something there that will tweak your inspiration and imagination. But ultimately, we want to see you connected. Parts 2 and 3 tonight, which won't be on YouTube, they won't be recorded, will be breakout groups. Now, the feedback section from each breakout group will be recorded and will be available on YouTube. Through this entire event, though, as I've said now, we actually want you to feel that you're able to connect. If you hear something that you do want to connect in with, or if there's somebody that you've seen that you'd like to hear more from or ask questions about, we'd encourage you to contact us at the Included team. You can do that on our website at includedpage.com or our Facebook. Just jump on Facebook and type in Included Page and you can contact us there. You might also contact us by email, team@includedpage.com, and we'll make sure that we can connect you up with people in your area. The name and the intention of the event is, after all, Included Connect. Now, this one's really important, not just for the breakout groups, but actually for our whole event. We want to really stipulate that our starting point tonight is an understanding of the need for inclusion and an acceptance that we need to work towards being a more inclusive Salvation Army, particularly in the breakout groups. We understand that there are a variety of views in the Salvation Army around those who are gender and sexuality diverse, but this is not the place for that debate. All of what you hear tonight, including participation in the breakout groups, has as a starting point the acceptance of the need for more inclusion. So thank you for respecting that and bringing respectful dialogue. Well, I think that's about all from me. That's all the housekeeping stuff. I'm now going to pass to a very good friend and one of the included team who couldn't possibly be further geographically from where I am right now. From the very south of Australia, I'm going to pass to my friend in the very north of the globe in Norway, Irene, who's going to lead us through some scripture and some prayer. Thanks, Irene.
Thank you, Chris. I would like to share with you some thoughts that was posted on the Nordic inclusive site. One of the members had been pondering about why people in the Salvation Army and also other Christians come to such different conclusions regarding the inclusion of LGBT plus persons. She then quotes from Philippians 1, verse 9 to 11. And this is my prayer, that your love may be abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. I want to draw your attention to verse 10, so that you may be able to discern what is best. In the Norwegian Bible, this reads, so that you may be able to discern what is important. I wonder if we sometimes confuse important with right. And if we are hung up in discerning what is right, there will automatically be something that is wrong. Whereas the opposite of important is not so important. The important point in this connection is that not so important doesn't exclude in the same way that wrong might do. So that's my thoughts. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this wonderful community of including people. Help us to discern what is important for your children and for your kingdom. Bless this event and every participant. Amen. And now I am pleased to hand over to Josh.
Sure. Thank you, Irene. I'm Josh. I'm an officer in the UK territory in a place called Keighley. And just to give you a quick snapshot of the picture of inclusion in this territory, I've personally been overwhelmed with just how prevalent the Holy Spirit's move towards inclusion, moving the territory towards inclusion has gone. I find myself talking to people and openly talking about inclusion and finding that almost everyone I speak to is of a similar view, dependent on, regardless of age, position within the army, soldier, adherent and everything, which certainly wasn't the case 10 years ago, where there was a real kind of a fear about speaking up, an unsureness about who might have what views and so on. So I wanted to share that as a word of encouragement, especially to those of you who might be in a territory where there isn't so much inclusion around and you feel very isolated. I've seen great movement within this territory towards inclusion. You may have picked up that the territorial commander sent a very pastorally, very gracious letter to all members of the Salvation Army in the UK, outlining the desire to be better at being there for members of the rainbow community. And the Salvation Army in this territory has also released a resource for pastoring young people, which is really exciting and encouraging to see happening. And whilst the letter recently from the General, that you'll all be aware of, did cause a lot of hurt and a lot of anger, I've also seen it cause a massive amount of energy and enthusiasm and dedication to the inclusion journey and the inclusion calls. And there's a few initiatives that are kind of coming out of that. And there's been a SA UKI inclusion Facebook group. And if you're not a member, I would encourage you to join, especially if you're in this country. That's the SA UKI inclusion group on Facebook, where there's mutual support and conversation that happens there. And again, over the last few weeks since that letter, membership of that has really ballooned, which shows a great thirst for inclusion. We're hoping as well to, a few of us are meeting to organize a prayer meeting, which we hope will be a regular occurrence, to pray for movement in our stance, to pray for the decision makers, and of course to pray for those who have been damaged or hurt or as a result of the fallout of our stance, for our rainbow brothers and sisters. We're also engaging on a mapping exercise to try and invite people to sign up to not a petition, but to a statement of faith that we believe that the Salvation Army, that the Holy Spirit is moving towards full inclusion of the rainbow community. And so keep your eyes open for that, will be happening soon. And finally, a storytelling and pastoral care initiative, which again, keep your eyes open, which will give people the opportunity to tell their stories, but also to receive pastoral care. It may be that some people are very isolated within this territory and need to know where the safe places are where they can receive that kind of pastoral care. A very brief snapshot there of inclusion movement within the UK. And I'm actually going to pass back to Irene to give us a Norway update.
Yeah, we have a Facebook group for the Nordic countries as well. It started in 2007 with a closed group, and this in 12 years we gathered less than 150 members. That's because few soldiers and even fewer officers dare to have their name connected with the included case. However, things have developed in a positive direction, particularly in the last few years. And in 2019, we decided to create an open group, and we now have more than 800 members. And this is just for the Nordic countries, which I think is, it's a small Salvation in the Salvation Army world. It's a small community. So I think 800 members is quite a lot. And we have stated on the group that the purpose of the group is to unite Salvation Army people who wants to move the Salvation Army in an inclusive direction. And they have to answer 2 entry questions. You have to be a member somehow of the Salvation Army, or at least work for the Salvation Army to become a member. And you have to agree that we must allow for different views on same-sex marriage. And also the group wants to promote acceptance and understanding in the Salvation Army for the acceptance of LGBT plus persons, and the acceptance of same-sex marriage as equal to between a man and a woman. We have a good dialogue with the territorial headquarters in Norway, Iceland, and the Faroe Island territory. And we feel that at least in this territory, things are moving in the right direction. Last year, we organized a petition for the whole group, and we published it for others to sign as well. And it was going to be sent to the IHQ. This was for some reason not received, maybe due to the pandemics. I think the pandemics have been blamed for all sorts of things. Anyway, in connection with a recent letter from the General, we decided to post a petition on our page once more. We ended up with almost 700 signatures, and we sent it as a response to the general's letter. Like everywhere else, we are moving forward with small steps, but I feel that we are moving forward. That's a good thing. I want now to hand over to the other side of the world, to Colin Daly.
And greetings. I don't know if you can see me yet. Apologies, I don't have a background. My machine's playing up. So just on 11 years ago, plus 2 days, Salvos for a More Inclusive Church began. And it started with a group of just some friends in South Australia and Melbourne who were concerned that we weren't having the conversations around inclusion. And so they got together and started just talking about it on Facebook. And more people found out about it, and it grew and it started to grow. When I joined, there were about 30 people. We now have 2,652 members as of half an hour ago. In the last 3 weeks since the General's message, we have gone up nearly 100 members. What that says is that people want to know of places where they can get information, where they can be supported, where they can learn, where they can ask questions. And effectively, Salvation for a More Inclusive Church has really just existed as an umbrella to try and address a wide range of things. So we have resources. We also believe, though, that we have a pastoral role. Jesus says to his disciples, feed my sheep. And it's important that, we are able to look after those in our own community who have been hurt by the church. Some have been hurt that they've lost friends to suicide. Some have been hurt because they've been told by others in the church there's no job for them. And it's not just members of the LGBTQ community, it's family members and those who love them. So we, as I said, we're a big group. The majority of our members, our biggest country is Australia, but we also have UK, New Zealand, USA, Canada, and the next country may surprise you in size. It's India. And after India, the next largest group we have is Papua New Guinea. So the work that's happening in Norway is certainly looking after that. We want to be able to address the issues of what's happening with the General's letter. We did respond. There are questions around when the General says it goes against our current articulated view. The fact is, no, it doesn't. There are some things it does, but there are things in New Zealand. We have a New Zealand statement. We reject racism and sexism. We stand against homophobia and transphobia, which victimizes people and reinforces feelings of alienation, loneliness, and despair. We aim to be an inclusive church where everyone finds a welcome and can find the relationship with God. That is New Zealand Salvation Army formal policy. So when the General says against current view, he's actually inaccurate. So we just continue working with Included. We're an umbrella organisation. We have plenty of opportunity to share around the world, and we're grateful because we have good relationships. If any of you would also like to find a good place to tap into resources, many of us are in the Q Christian Fellowship group and attend Q Christian Fellowship conferences. I'm happy to give you some more information. Our details are on the Included webpage, and I guess that's that from me. So I'm happy to pass over to Margot in the Netherlands.
Thank you so much, Colin. It's good that I can name you my friend. So I'm Margot. I'm a Salvationist from the Amsterdam Goodwill Corps. Corps, it's already for 17 years in the red light district and has always been inclusive to whosoever. And now we are heading up to Pride 2021 Amsterdam. And for the last 5 years, we were an active part of Pride, just a little bit bigger every year. Corona makes it impossible to come together with very large groups now, but in the small gatherings, maybe even a deeper and better relationship with the rainbow community is coming on. The best thing, what we did when we were starting with Pride, is collaborate with the rainbow community, with the organizers, because we as a Salvation Army cannot just show up. We have to make sure why we are there. We have to explain why we are there. So it's also very important that the communication with the rainbow community and our Salvation Army community spread the same message, the message of inclusiveness and everybody can belong. The responses from the rainbow community are overall very positive. What? The Salvation Army on Pride? Never dreamed of you people being here. But we also hear about the hurt, the rejection, and it's our responsibility to be a hearing for everyone who is hurt by the church in God's name. Because I do believe that people need to see us being inclusive, because only talking about it is not enough anymore. But again, when you want to do something in Pride, make a plan together. In Amsterdam, the Salvation Army is now part of the Religious Pride Committee. So with other churches and other beliefs, like the Muslim community or the Jewish community, we share together our thoughts about a Pride and what we can do there as churches. And that are the Salvation Army principles, aren't they? Being together, God's voice in this world. If you want to know more, please feel free to get in contact with me, and we will help you setting up the relationships. Next week, we will have Pride Amsterdam. The Sunday service will be shared on the included page, subtitled in English, because I do think you do not understand Dutch a lot. I hope you will enjoy that. And now we will go on from Amsterdam to Chris Footer, because when we are on Pride, we also have to make sure we wear the good and nice shirts and everything. So Chris, take us away.
Thank you for the opportunity to share. So, Rainbow Wear. I founded Rainbow Wear earlier this year in response to a need. I found that many Salvationists, myself included, were looking for tangible ways to display solidarity, inclusion, and love. We wanted to wear our pride on our sleeves, literally, displaying it openly, that it might serve as a witness, a testimony, and a way of creating opportunities for conversation. I started out small, producing and shipping Rainbow Shield pins. These were inspired and supported by the work which was already being done by folks in the US and New Zealand. I owe an awful lot to the groundwork which they have done. The goal, though, was to expand upon that work, making Rainbow Shield pins more accessible, easy to order, and available to all. To date, we have shipped over 1,000 of these pins to the UK, US, Finland, Japan, Germany, Australia, New Zealand. It has been incredibly humbling to encounter so many people desiring to display love. I've encountered stories of people wearing this pin and being told by a new employee, who it turned out was gay, that their biggest fear in joining the Salvation Army was being ousted. When the chaplain walked in, though, wearing this, they knew that it was all going to be okay. They were able to openly and frankly discuss what was for them the elephant in the room. I've heard stories of people asking, well, what does that stand for? Creating dialogue amongst people who would otherwise have never considered their position on inclusion. If I had more time, I could share so many stories of how this simple piece of metal has opened doors and has promoted real change in people's lives. People being accepted, people being heard, people being understood for the first time in their contexts, being able to be their true and amazing selves, just as God intended them to be. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'll just quickly say that from there, we've expanded to accommodate the needs and desires of Salvationists the world over. We now have Rainbow Shield branded clothing available for direct shipping from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. We ship anywhere in the world, but have created these outlets to save you on delivery costs. If your country isn't on that list, please let me know, get in contact, and I will source a supplier closer to you. Anything to help resource and equip you in the most cost-effective way that we can. You can order the basic Rainbow Shield designs, or I can create custom orders with perhaps your core or your center name on. Other logos for your departments and things that are happening, the special events, pretty much anything at all that promotes and supports inclusion. I'm prepared to do the design work for you free of charge, and we'll just ship these items out to you as best we can. To be clear, this whole project is a not-for-profit. Rainbowware sells everything for what it costs to make. This is not about making a profit. In fact, if anything, I am running at a slight loss. But that's an investment which I'm prepared to make, because this is about resourcing and equipping people to represent God's love. Now, there's so much more that I would love to share about the backstory of the Rainbow Shield and how this humble symbol is impacting lives the world over. But I don't want to hog too much time from the other excellent speakers which we have lined up for you today. So, with that in mind, I would like to introduce you to Major Jenny Begent. As well as serving as the head of social mission at THQ here in Australia, she is an avid supporter and advocate for inclusion, both within and beyond the Salvation Army. I don't want to steal too much of her thunder, but there are some amazing initiatives happening under her leadership, including Rainbow Tick accreditation, Pride marches, LGBT movie nights, and so much more. It is with great pleasure that I now hand the microphone over to Major Jenny Begent.
Thank you very much, Christopher. It's great to be here. And in fact, it's a tremendous privilege to be with you tonight. What I want to talk to you about, and as Chris said, I'm the National Head of the Salvation Army Social Services in Australia, a very large organisation that meets a large group of people in need. One of the things I wanted to do when I came into the role was ensure that we had what we call the Rainbow Tick applied to all of our services nationally. Now, the Rainbow Tick's a framework that's developed by government that actually sets a benchmark for best practice in providing services that are safe, supportive, and inclusive for all genders. So we set about doing that and have been successful in applying that in Victoria, and we're starting to take it nationally. So we're training our staff in what it means to be a safe and inclusive workspace, helping our clients to understand that when they walk through the door, they'll be treated with respect, they'll be included, they'll be loved, and they'll be helped in whatever way they want or need. Some of the things we've done in order to spread the good news, which I think is probably a really good way to describe it, is we've begun to be involved in Pride marches. And about 7 years ago, we started our first venture into a Pride march. We wrapped ourselves up in all the colours of the rainbow and took the shield out into the streets, surrounded by our LGBTQ fellow members of society. It was a big step for the Salvation Army back then in Australia. And today, the last one we went to, of course, was in COVID, so our numbers were reduced significantly, but we were still there and still welcomed and still proud to be part of something that is important, and that says that the Salvation Army wants to be inclusive. One of the things we've also done as part of a National Social Services is we've actually lobbied our own leadership to provide a diversity and inclusion statement, and that took us 12 months. It didn't come without little pain, but we got there, and in July of this year, at the beginning of July, we were actually able to publish a diversity and inclusion statement that didn't go as far as we wanted it to, but it went a lot farther than we were hoping. And from that, we've developed a diversity action plan, which we will put together and take around the country, where there will be an expectation that all of our social services will provide input into that action plan and will actually be asked to report on what they're doing to ensure that their services are safe and inclusive. We also do lots of other things, as Chris said. We've got movie nights in September that are about bringing people together, not just to watch a movie, but to have discussions, to spend some social time with each other. We have groups such as Pride Parents, which provides support to those LGBTQ people who are doing things tough on their own as parents, or who are finding it difficult to access services and support. We try to provide lots and lots of ways of being as inclusive and as diverse as possible in our social services. If you're interested in what the framework looks like, I'm happy to share it with you. And I'm now going to hand over to Jessica.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica, and I am a lieutenant in the Salvation Army, currently stationed in a little city called Oulu in northern Finland. And I have the pleasure of telling you all a little bit about the Included team, the group behind this event, and tell you a little bit about us and what we do. So the Included team is a group of 15 like-minded people, somehow connected to the Salvation Army, and we currently represent 8 different territories. We're working to equip and connect others towards inclusion, as well as provide platforms for dialogue and discussion. One of our team members, who unfortunately isn't here with us today, often says that we can't do theology detached from people's stories. So our goal in this is not to raise our own voices, but to uplift the voices that have too often been ignored and create opportunities for those who are or have been excluded, and to share their stories. We encourage people globally to gather and work towards inclusion locally through advocacy, respectful dialogue with leadership. We've hosted and are planning more upcoming events and forums such as this one to explore theology, research, and hear each other's stories. We have a website, which I believe has already been posted in the chat, but we can go ahead and post it again, includedpage.com, where you can find different resources, including papers, articles, personal testimonies, and tools to help you connect with others. There are many ways to get involved in the Included team if you're interested, ranging from joining the Included team itself, helping develop and run upcoming webinars, creating digital stuff for us, such as videos or graphics, contributing articles, research, testimonies, or even art that you've created, such as drawings, poems, or songs for us to share on our website. There has also been some talk of launching a podcast. So if that's something you're interested in, please contact us and let us know, or suggest guests that you would want to hear from. You can find all of our contact information and more information about us and what we're doing, again, at our website, includedpage.com. Many of our team members are also involved in other local initiatives to work towards inclusion. Here to tell you a little bit about his experience doing that in the United States is Major John Phil Winter.
Thank you, Jessica. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are in the world. I'm very glad to be able to share a little bit from the United States. Now, some of you might imagine that because we're the United States, we would be very progressive and liberal and moving forward quite proudly in this issue. Unfortunately, quite the contrary is the truth. When the general wrote in his letter that there was no desire to change, I feel that he was speaking for the 4 territories, or at least the leadership in the United States. We we don't only not have a lack of desire to change, it seems there's a resistance to any kind of change. And I fear that with the political climate that we live in the United States, some of that conservative political ideology has really kind of found its way into the theology of much of our leadership, unfortunately. Because of this, we don't really have any kind of unified group within the 4 territories that are working towards inclusion. Now, you'll find around the United States individual officers and soldiers, core and communities that might be trying to do something, but it's very sporadic. And oftentimes it depends on the nature of leadership over them, whether they're able to continue in that work. One example is in our Central Territory, there's always a delegation of the Salvation Army at the Pride Parade in Chicago. Depending, though, upon the leadership, comes down to whether they're able to wear shields or demonstrate that they are part of the Salvation Army, if they can or cannot wear uniform. And of course, with this changing attitude from leadership to leadership, it doesn't provide the safe environment that we want to give to people from the LGBTQIA+ community to come into our programs, into our churches, and into our lives. And so what we hope, or what I'm hoping, is that through this, we can start to find a way to move forward, to unify, to be a little bit more organized in supporting one another, but also be a little stronger in our voice to our leadership. I think right now many people are a little cautious because we don't have a leadership that seems to support. We need backup with one another. It's early morning in the USA today. I don't know how many there are from the US that are able to join this morning, but of course this will be recorded. So if you're watching it later, please feel free to get in contact with me so that we can maybe pool our resources, support one another a little bit more, and look at the different areas where we are doing work and make that a little bit stronger. But I want to hand over now to Alison and Dawn, and they're going to talk about our stories.
Thanks, John Phil. So I'm Alison, and I'm an Aussie, if you can't work it out from the accent. And what happens when you get an Aussie, 2 Americans, and a Scot who's arrived by way of Wolverhampton, who all think that they're the only person like them in the Salvation Army? Well, one of the things that happens is you get to talking and you start to discover that you're actually really got a lot in common. And then an accident happens and you suddenly create a Facebook group for other people who also think that they're the only people like them in the Salvation Army. And then you discover that everybody's got a story. Every LGBTIA+ person in the Salvation Army has got a story, and that story is worth telling. And I'm going to get Dawn to talk a little bit about what the group does and what it's around. But that's how it started. It was an accident because we all thought that we were the only one.
Okay, so we currently have about 152 members spread across the world with representatives from across the LGBTQIA+ spectrum. There are about a third of us with current Army involvement, including active officers and soldiers, but the majority are no longer involved, but see the Army as being an important part of their journey. And a smaller number who feel that they would return if it was ever become safe enough for them to do so. It's a very friendly and supportive Facebook group, and it's always been a safe space. We've supported and affirmed people who have just come out, celebrated weddings, and have been there as well for people who've suffered the grief and trauma of the loss of their soldiership or officership. As an LGBT salvationist, like Alison said, you can often feel very alone, or that no one truly understands what it's like. Even Christian LGBT friends don't really get the Army ways. However, in this group, there are those who have walked a similar walk and can empathise in ways that's rarely found elsewhere. A lot of people have already mentioned the recent letter from the General, and in our group, it did shake many people, with some experiencing painful feelings of hurt and rejection and resurfacing of previous trauma they thought they dealt with many years ago. And while there are currently active stories within our group of people being excluded in some parts of the Army world, even for their identity alone, there are other stories of inclusion and hope and positive steps being taken, like we're hearing today, that give us hope and encouragement for the future. But what you can be sure of in our group, if you're LGBTQIA plus and have the Salvation Army as part of your story, you can be assured of a listening ear and people who understand where you're coming from. So if you do want to join us, Alison's going to tell you how you can get involved.
So it's really simple. You just got to message one of the admins. It's a secret group for all the reasons that you can imagine, so that people feel safe. You can get my details from the included team, or you can look for me on Facebook, on Facebook, yeah, right, on Facebook, and fling me a message, and I'll make sure that you get hooked up with the group. And now I'm going to pass on to across the ditch to Major Ian Gainsford in New Zealand.
Thank you. Kia ora. My name's Ian. I'm a divisional leader here in New Zealand, and I'm also the chair of our Moral and Social Issues Council. And just wanted to share briefly a little bit of the journey around the decision by the New Zealand, Fiji, Tonga and Samoa territory to issue guidelines on conversion or reparative therapies, and how that was developed. As I became involved with our MASIC, Moral and Social Issues Council, became aware of some historic instances where people had been prayed for or guided towards counselling because of their sexual identity, and then became involved in one in my role here as a divisional leader. In discussion with other members of MASIC, we talked about how we could approach this. In 2015, the Salvation Army had officially withdrawn all territorial or international statements, positional statements on sexuality, in order to foster an environment in which further discussion and reflection could take part. Our approach was to suggest that this was actually an issue of power and the abuse of power, on the basis that conversion therapies, there are plenty of studies that indicate they don't work and they inevitably do significant harm to people. So we actually worked with some material that had been developed by a member of the MASIC team in Australia. The Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit here in New Zealand did a little bit of research. We kicked it around within the MASIC group, and in the end developed a guideline that outlines the issue, the Salvation Army's position, biblical and theological background, which emphasized the love of God and the desire of God for shalom and wholeness. And then finally, some practical responses, such that, including that Salvationists will oppose the vilification of or discrimination against anyone on the grounds of sexuality or gender. And that includes attempts to change another person's sexual orientation or gender identity, and includes actions which deny a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. We made it as expansive as we could, to not just tackle what we might call formal types of conversion therapy, but including informal prayer-based. We sometimes use the phrase "pray away the gay." We included that as something that Salvationists will not participate in, and provided some pastoral guidelines. We then presented this to what's called the Territorial Executive Council, which sounds way more important than it is. And it was unanimously supported. I mean, there were some questions, there was some nervousness, there were some conservative voices who wanted to refine it, but it was supported and then taken to our Territorial Governance Board and unanimously adopted by them and published on our website. It was given a soft launch, but every officer was made aware of the guidelines. I believe that there are now guidelines in the Canada and UK territories. This is the kind of research I think we can engage in that genuinely takes us forward. The link to the guidelines have been posted on the chat, so feel free to have a look and read through those. there's a journey of policy and research being done to create a more inclusive environment within the Salvation Army, certainly in our territory. I'm going to hand over now to, it's very confusing, it's another Ian from New Zealand. He is known quite widely around New Zealand as Old Ian. So Ian Hudson, hand over to you.
Kia ora tātou, thank you for that welcome. I think, yes, I'm the Director of the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit, and also the co-chair of the Māori Ministry Runanga. And I'm going to talk a little bit about background in New Zealand briefly. Really big issue historically for us was the fact that in 1986, the Salvation Army was a key player in what was probably one of the most divisive issues the nation faced. In 1986, the Salvation Army took a prominent role, so that for years afterwards, that kind of, well, that put us in a certain kind of position. In 2006, our then Territorial Commander, Commissioner Garth McKenzie, signed an apology, which public apology. And some years later, in 2012, we had a signing of a rapprochement, agreeing to go in relationship with Rainbow Wellington. That was again through our headquarters. In 2016, we had an interfaith service in which the Territorial Commander of the time, and I was at that point the Divisional Commander of the area, we attended with a Salvation Army brass band an interfaith service which was LGBTQ oriented, and there was a lot of healing, I think, that took place in that service. Very surprised to see Salvation Army there. People were, and yeah, I felt there was a lot of healing that took place in that. Some of the things I think are significant that have occurred in our country are things like the war cry has carried a number of articles over time, very affirming, including one I might say about my son Craig coming out as gay publicly, which caused a stir, as you can imagine, a lot of support, but also unnerving some people. So war cry has been a key part of that. But along with that, we've had what other people have talked about, involvement in gay pride. My son also works with intersex awareness, Aotearoa. They've got a relationship there which they do fundraising for. They've had an event in the core that he worships at. Teaching in youth councils, we've been invited, well, my son more than me, but on one occasion it was me as well, to talk at youth councils about this issue. And Christina Tyson's been a real, yeah, what would you call it, champion, along with people like Colin. Yeah, there's quite a lot going. I could say a whole lot more, but those are just some things that I can think of right now that have gone on in New Zealand. And so thanks for the opportunity to talk, and I'll hand over back to John Phil again.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you to everybody that shared what's going on in your respective territories. It's certainly encouraging to hear some of the work and the will that is behind the work to move us to a place of inclusion. Many of us know just how important that is. Well, this is the opportunity now for other people to share their voices. We're going to go into our breakout sessions. All right, everyone. Well, it looks like we are back from the breakout sessions. I hope that we've been able to have some good and interesting conversation. We're going to take a little bit of time right now just to get a little bit of feedback on each of the groups. And so the facilitators for the groups are hopefully going to act as the mouthpieces for that. So we're going to start off with Josh.
Yeah, so we started off talking about the inclusion statements that that we're talking about in New Zealand, we have in the UK as well, and that actually for many of us it was a real challenge, because as great as the stuff is within those statements, it's not necessarily true. We could be part of a church which isn't inclusive, like individual churches, but also it gives the wrong impression, because it talks about us aiming to be an inclusive church, whereas actually the Salvation Army isn't. You know, you can only, yes, our social services might be inclusive, but actually once you get further on, you know, spiritually we're not inclusive, and people who are in same-sex relationships are not free to become officers or soldiers. And that actually this was a real sense of frustration for a number of people in the group, and I'll admit personally for me too. And how do we justify that? Are we being deceptive towards the public? I think kind of a conclusion we came to was that actually that is going to be a frustration, that many of the people behind those statements, some of us might view it as a cynical PR stunt to try and mislead our funders and the public. But actually a number of people behind those statements are very inclusive, and this is attempting to move the Army forward as a step forward. And that actually the kind of conclusion that we came to as a group, and that many of us shared, was that when people meet the Salvation Army, they're not meeting the doctrines, or they're not meeting statements or any of that. They're not meeting our internal politics, they're meeting us as Salvationists. So, you know, each one of us here is the Salvation Army to the people that we meet. And that by modeling that just in the way that we are in our lives is much more important than whatever, you know, people at HQ get up to. That's not to say that that isn't important, because there is that barrier for those that we are meeting individuals. We still have to fight that fight, but most importantly is the local level inclusion. So yeah, briefly, that's what we talked about. Yes, the next person, whoever that is.
Hi, it's me. Hi, folks. So our group 2, we talked about a few things. We talked about the actual practical ways in which we could model inclusion, and we had examples of young people's groups, youth groups and whatever, that actually have inclusion policies in their core. We talked about how we may or may not forge ahead in some conversations, and how we work with core councils and how we might have that conversation. We talked about the need for inclusion to be active and not passive, and how we need to be intentional about it. We had some examples come up in the chat around married gay couples that teach in Sunday schools and things like that. So lots of different things. And we also talked about whether we need to drop the inclusion conversation and actually move ahead a little bit, because inclusion may just mean that you're welcoming someone through the door, but not actually creating a space where they get to participate fully. And so we want to move beyond inclusion and actually start talking equity, where people can undertake the same roles under the same conditions, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. I think that's about it from group 2.
So I had group 3, and I was a participant in group 3, and we had a great conversation about really practical things that you can do where you are that make a difference. Things like using pronouns in your signature block, or just asking someone when you meet someone, say, you know, my pronouns are, what pronouns do you use? So that it's just a normal part of your everyday conversation, and it signals acceptance. And we had some great stories about local efforts to just make inclusion part of the everyday conversation of a call. Inclusion as default. Inclusion is just what we do here, and how you make that work. We had a little bit of a discussion about the both Australian and New Zealand experience, and we talked a little bit too about Canada and the US. And it was a really helpful, I found a really encouraging conversation about just practical things that you can do every day that are just small changes to your practice that make a really big difference. And the other thing that was really clear was the importance for people to know that they're not alone if they're an officer who is an ally, or if they're a soldier who is an ally, or if they're an LGBTIQA person, that meeting others just through this event, connecting up, is a really important part of both feeling safe and being able to move forward. So that's it for group 3.
So I had the other group, the next group, which were a great group. Some of the stuff that we discussed about was obviously that we are to lead by example, ourselves being open. It was really important to our group to start the conversation now. We talked about the fact that it's been said, you know, to just kind of wait to start inclusion, but our group was really passionate about this. Waiting that's a no. It needs to start now. The conversation needs to be had. Ways of conversation, they were saying, was within their own context, but also writing to local paper, being open and transparent. Someone had this great line that said, we're not talking about a matter, we're talking about people. And I thought that was a significant difference that can change our thinking. And another thing we were discussing in our group was, when we create a culture and an environment in our place, how do we move from informal, organic spaces to actually formalize those? So for those who are core officers, when they leave, that culture remains and is something set in concrete. So there's some of the things my great group discussed.
Okay, so I'm had the next group, and there was some interesting things happening. Certainly, there is work that's being done towards inclusion. I think it's called the Core Recovery Program within the UK, which is being met with acceptance. It's a totally inclusive program, and there's people from all different levels of the Salvation Army that are accepting of that. And of course, there are individual core where we find there's a lot of inclusion. The barrier or the issue becomes is individual core don't always represent the larger organization in that practice, and there's only so much that they can do as far as how they're able to fully include people. And soldiership seems to be a bit of a sticking point, that there's a lack of consistency on who can be soldiers and who cannot. There are soldiers that are in same-sex relationships and marriages, and then other people who are just identify as part of the rainbow community are forbidden from being made soldiers, and then that impedes their ability to be involved, whether in sections, in band, in songsters, in leadership, etc. And of course, we are facing, certainly in certain territories, soldiership is in decline, and yet we're forbidding those who want to become soldiers to become soldiers. So that's kind of creating a problem for ourselves. But as was brought up by one of our participants, which is a very important point to note, is that loving other people and sharing Christ is more important than becoming a soldier. Becoming a soldier is where the organization says that you belong, but I think we show that we belong by loving others, if we're a part of the rainbow community or not, and being inclusive in the way that we share and we love others. And so now I'll hand over to the next group.
Yeah, that is me. I got a group of people who were, I think all of them were in Australia. One was from the US. We talked a bit about inclusion in Australia, and it's fairly accepting, but of course not everywhere. And maybe, as has been mentioned before, there's a difference between social work and the core work. Most of the people in the group were allies, which is great. It's great to have allies who take part in these events like this. And hearing that they also struggle is, yeah, kind of admirable that they keep on working towards inclusion. We talked a bit about finding the right core. a safe core, because what you don't want is a welcoming, but you have to something core, but you want an all-inclusive, you can join in any activity and worship. That's what we want. That's what we want. And what we mention as things to do is to raise the awareness and education about LGBT+. What does it mean? People need to know. We didn't mention the word lifestyle, but one of the worst words I know is to connect lifestyle with LGBT+, because it isn't, and education around that. And also sharing stories. We know that the other side, those who are not inclusive, might be very point to the Bible and have an I am right attitude. So it's important to share stories. Parents need to share their stories so that you can raise awareness that this is actually human beings suffering, and maybe you can appeal to people for them to see that. But then there's a problem with sharing stories in a safe place, because what you do not want is to share your stories and at the same time have the fear of repercussions, for instance, from your core officer or from the Salvation Army leadership. So Australia has come a long way, but they still have a long way to go. And these were the things that we talked about. So next is Martin.
Yes, we had a very mixed group, very nice group from Australia, New Zealand, USA, Canada, Europe, Netherlands mainly. So it was great to hear from all these people. Different places in a people who are in a different position. Also more accepting, less affirming. It depends. We realized also on where if we are a core leader, for example, or if we are a core member, what possibilities we have, what we can do. As we mentioned, as has already been mentioned, the most important thing is we are not talking about a matter or a subject, an issue. We are talking about people and people's stories. And the most important thing we can do is just on an individual basis to be approachable, to be open, accepting in our personal encounters with people. That was emphasized in our group. And connecting is to connect with each other is so important and a need of the hour. We had one statement from the USA where this obviously should be happening. We had one beautiful example, a person who left the army and feels it's safe now to come back and has taken steps to come back. And in our breakout group managed to get connected with the others. So connection is very important. We heard from one core in Canada, they are using the faith-based facilitation model that the Salvation Army offers. And I would recommend that if you don't know it. Perhaps we can put the link also to that. If you go to the Salvation Army International website, you will find it somewhere there. A very good model to start dialogue in a group about any subject, any issue. I mentioned also the Let's Talk About material that the Salvation Army internationally published. We may not perhaps agree to all its content, but it is a way to step into, to offer dialogue. And I encourage you to ask your territories to release that material, and because it's up to them to so we can use this material. I know we've heard from places where people haven't heard that this material exists. It is out there and available. Yes. What else? I certainly haven't covered everything, but but it was an interesting experience. So I pass on to the next person, Ian Hudson.
I was actually in your group, Martin, so you've already said everything.
Oh, yes, sorry, of course. Okay, I just see your name on the list. I'm probably the last one.
My group hasn't been represented at all yet, so I guess I might be next, even though I'm missing from the list.
Over to Jessica.
Thank you. We took a second to get started, but I would say we had a pretty good conversation. We started with someone mentioning they had been wondering where those rainbow pins had come from. So I think it's cool that that link was there, that we saw a presentation from Rainbowware earlier. My group also brought up a lot of questions, questions surrounding why people are so afraid of change and what do we do with that fear? How do we start these conversations? Is it just preaching about acceptance from the pulpit, or is there more to that? And that is one way to start the conversation, but we also suggested a couple others. Also, the idea that a lot of, or the challenge, I guess, that people think that once you get saved, you will look like us and act like us, or the idea that we're all supposed to be the same, how challenging that is. And also the fact that if the gospel isn't open for everyone, it's not actually good news. We also had the chance to hear from a trans person. They shared their story of going to a couple different cores and not really feeling at place. And I hope I'm doing their story justice as I share it briefly. But then finding a different core where they were accepted and they feel safe and comfortable. And I think their exact words were that they found a spiritual home. So that was really encouraging to hear. And we ended on a note of hope, of hoping for change, not knowing exactly when it's going to come or to what degree, but hope that it will come.
Thank you so much, everyone, all facilitators, for sharing and ending on that word of hope. That's certainly where we want to be, a people of hope moving forward. We're going to break out into our next groups. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had some good conversation, some encouragement, maybe learned some stuff as well. We're going to do the feedback again. We'll go in the same order that we went in before. Can I just ask facilitators, I know there's a lot of good stuff, but we do want to be respectful of people's time. We know that people have given up time to be here, so let's try and be as succinct as we can be. I struggle with that myself, so I won't judge you. But let's start off with Josh.
So just to keep it, I think, super brief, we saw inclusion happening in a massive way, kind of on the fringes and in the wilderness. That actually the wilderness away from the church structure has been incredibly fertile. So we had a house group represented. Most of our folk were in Australia. Had a house group represented, which was fully inclusive and welcoming and packed with people coming where they can be themselves. We had an alpha group situation where the first person to come to Christ through that alpha group was a gay man. And yeah, we spoke about lots of things, but just to keep it brief, this idea that we can be creative, we can go, this is in our blood as the Salvation Army, and that's where it is a great place to be in terms of inclusion. So I'll just say that for now. Over to Brad, I think.
Yeah, over to me. I love that Josh facilitated the Australians and I had the folk from the UK. I've got it in dot points that the welcome and the safety and the inclusion and the well-being needs to come from the team, not from one person. That it's something you need to revisit all the time and make sure that you're going over and just coming back to ensuring that you need to work on the culture of safe conversations, regardless whether it's about sexual orientation or any other difficult topic. Keep love at the centre of the table. My two favourite quotes: even if it's not a safe place, I will be known as a safe person. And somebody else also said that, you know, this sort of difficulty is not going to happen on my watch. So taking that personal responsibility for things. Apart from that, we also spoke about some great stuff that was happening where CORE were participating in Pride events, and we had a couple of examples at Leamington Spa and Durham in the UK, and I was able to give some experience from what we've done both in Perth and Hobart in Australia. Over to number 3.
And that's me. And again, in Australia, but I had the pleasure of hanging out with Canadians and Americans. So, Chris, we're going to have to help you with your geography. The great thing was that we had a conversation about the fact that many officers and soldiers in the army are either LGBTI themselves or have family members who are. And so that personal level of inclusion became really important, and how to support each other and encourage each other in consistency and in being involved in each other's lives and being able to walk alongside people on their journey. And so over to group 4.
All right, that's the Aussie who also was not with Aussies. I got the international crew of Chile, Switzerland, Netherlands, UK, Singapore. We went around the world. But we had some really great conversations. We had one person in our group who bravely stated in their home it's not safe, in their country, but they shared how they bravely still work for the Salvation Army and they wear the pin, and so they start conversations. So we applaud their bravery. We heard about how leaders have staff members who both have opposing views. So the CORE officers trying to make a safe space and the staff don't agree. So they talked about how they navigated ensuring they had clear guidelines on what's expected of a safe place. Again, big shout outs about the rainbow shields and the conversation that starts. One place they set a theme for the year at their CORE called Safe Places, and they actually got the conversation started, not specifically around the rainbow community, but started with the idea of what is a safe space to work away into it. And I thought that was beautiful. And again, we had someone make that statement that someone's already said, but I'm going to say it again, that idea of if we don't have a safe CORE, we can at least be a safe person. And I thought that was a beautiful way to end our group.
Okay, so I've got the next group. I'll try to be succinct, so I laid that gauntlet down and challenged everybody else. So we shared about how talking to leadership is important in trying to create that safe space. And there's leadership that's more open sometimes than we think they are. We had a plug for rainbow wear that did not come from Chris, but the idea of wearing something that demonstrates that you are a safe person, that this is a place where if you identify as part of the rainbow community, that you are in a place where there are people who will receive you and accept you. Obviously, sharing stories, personal stories makes a difference. We gather around Jesus. Jesus is our focal point. We listen to one another, having that place of belonging that people need. But also the role of accepting others who differ on this with us, that we also need to model that being loving and kind, that it's not just the other side that has to move to where we are, but to be like Christ. Sometimes that means we have to learn, just like in families, we disagree with one another, but we've still got to find that way of loving others as well, because the more acceptance that is shown, the more acceptance is there, and those who see that others are accepted may also see that they too can be accepted, because the reality is we're not going to possibly find a place, I would imagine, where everybody's always going to be in agreement on this. But if we can gather around Jesus, then that's certainly the best place that we could start and end, of course. And I'll hand over to the next group.
Yeah, that's me. I had a Australian group again. And I mentioned that my core is very included, but I don't know why. I don't know why everyone in my core does right. I'm not saying that everyone is inclusive, but it's a good place to be. But I think that's that points out how important allies are, and that allies are teaching everyone to be nice to one another. There's also the point of being conscious of pronouns, because this can be very important to some people. And if in doubt, ask what they want to be, how they want to be addressed. There was one person mentioned in the education, but not about LGBT, but the gospel. What are we teaching? What is the focus of the biblical teachings? So if the focus is that God loves, and we love because God loves, that is a very important focus, a bit like John Phil mentioned. And we also need to accept that there are other views and maybe avoid the polarized discussions, because they will often end with you don't agree with us, so you are not saved. Instead, we should focus and concentrate on those who are undecided. I think this is the biggest group. People who might not actually know what they mean, and get them on as at least the nice persons who make people feel welcome, whatever. So, Martin, you're next.
Sorry, I was muted. I again had quite an international group, a smaller group, representing very different places, also when it comes to kind of safety in these issues. So we had one interesting example from a person actually in a very accepting place and core, a hetero person speaking out as a LGBTQ ally and being promoting that. And she was had some negative reaction actually from within the LGBT community, from people. So perhaps out of fear, but it just shows that we have to keep confidence and to protect the privacy and respect the privacy of people, and perhaps make sure what we say, where we say it. We mainly in the group we said it is very important, even if the core or the place is not a safe place, but that we make sure we are safe people, as we have now heard, that it is very important that we offer in our personal conversation with people that safe place in dialogue, especially when there is someone concerned and perhaps on the way to a coming out. These people, they do need our protection, our privacy, and our confidence. But we can create these safe spaces in our conversations. I think that's the most important thing. We mentioned it is important to be aware of language, vocabulary people use, and let people know if they use any language, vocabulary that is not considered to be really affirming and accepting and inclusive. Yes, I pass on to the next group. There's, I think perhaps Jessica, is that?
Yes, I think I'm the last one. I was last time. We also brought up that idea of, even if the core or the place isn't safe, we can be safe people. Someone brought up the metaphor of when children are playing or there's a sports game, it's safe when everyone knows what the rules are. So we can set up boundaries about the language that we use or that sort of thing. one person talked about how I guess they were a core officer. I don't think we actually said that, but they'll preach or they'll talk about inclusion and changing to become more inclusive. And then older people will tell them, I'm too old to change. I'm too old to change the way that I think. I've thought this way forever. And his response is that you're not too old to change. You're not too old to start loving people. And I really liked that. And another person mentioned the importance of teaching youth about this and encouraging youth to become more inclusive. And I think it's something that the younger generation maybe naturally is a bit more inclusive. And near the end, I shared a little bit about my own context where I am, and that I'm at a point where ensuring someone's safety is more important to me than my desire to be inclusive. I hope that makes sense, because there are very few people in my territory that are safe people. So I can't guarantee that the next officer after me wouldn't be harmful. And we had a lot of the same people as the last group. So in response to that, and I'm very grateful they did, one of the people again brought up that idea of hope. So once again, we ended on that thought of hope.
And what a great place to end on the breakout groups there, that we are a people of hope. We have a gospel of hope, we have a promise, and we have a future, and we hold on to those things. Thank you, everybody, for your involvement. Thank you, facilitators, for taking on the responsibility to help in these conversations. Thank you to everybody that got involved and shared in the conversation. And for those of you that maybe didn't feel you were able to at this time, I really hope that you were able to pick up on some principles, ideas, but more importantly, that sense of hope. Even when things don't always seem in your context to be positive or moving in the direction that you want them to, stuff is happening. The Holy Spirit is moving. And so there is a bright future, I believe, for us all to be working towards. So I'm going to hand over now to Chris, and I think he's going to finish us out.
Thanks, John Phil, and thanks to everybody who participated today, all of our breakout room facilitators, all of our presenters, and each of you for giving up some time to either log in live or watch a little bit later on to hear about some of the work that's happening around inclusion in the Salvation Army across the world, or to participate in conversation or thought around what it looks like for us to model inclusion, to provide safe spaces, and to perhaps join in the movement we have in this great Salvation Army to be a more inclusive church, particularly for those who are gender or sexuality diverse. Don't forget, if you want to make contact with us at the Included team, or if you're looking to contact any of the presenters that you've heard tonight, or perhaps if you'd like to connect with people in your area who are interested in or working for inclusion, you can make contact with us through our website, includedpage.com. You can email us, team@includedpage.com, or of course you can find us on Facebook. Included Page, super easy. We've got more great events coming up this year. In just over a month's time, we're going to be having our next Included event, and then in November, our fantastic global, across time zone connection, conversation, equipping gathering, Included 2021. We're really looking forward to sharing with you in this great yearly event, which will take place over a few days with events in all of the different time zones that you can connect into to learn more about theology, research, policy, and how to provide safe spaces for those who are LGBTIQA+. Until then, we maybe look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for joining. And now to wrap us up, a benediction, one which is a beautiful old Franciscan benediction, but seems to suit us well today. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. May this last part particularly be the prayer for us all. Amen. And see you again.